For 16 years, I lived with a lie that tore my family apart. They took everything from me, my home, my dignity, even my memories. They pushed me into a windowless room and expected me to fade away quietly. But when my son called frantically from his luxury vacation, demanding to know why the credit cards weren't working, something inside me finally broke free. Not a penny, I told him. I'm not paying anything. 4 simple words that shattered their carefully constructed world of secrets. They never expected an old farm woman to fight back. They never imagined I'd discover what happened to my daughter, or that I'd find the granddaughter they tried to hide from me. Now, as I uncover layers of betrayal deeper than I ever imagined, I realize the most dangerous thing about me is that I have nothing left to lose. If you've ever been underestimated, overlooked, or pushed aside, my story will show you that it's never too late to reclaim your power. Follow my channel for more stories that will break your heart and heal it again. Like and comment to let me know where you're watching from. My name is Eileen Callahan, and this is how I took back everything they stole from me. The day started like many others on our farm in Nebraska, with the sound of my son's pickup truck being loaded before dawn. Except this time, I wasn't helping pack their bags. I wasn't even invited to say goodbye. I stood in the kitchen holding my chipped coffee mug, the one with the faded flowers my daughter had painted 30 years ago. My arthritic fingers trembled slightly as I watched through the window. My son Jason, his wife Brittany, and her mother Lorraine were loading suitcases for their coastal vacation, laughing, making plans, without even a glance toward the house where I stood watching. "Mom will be fine," I heard Jason say, his voice carrying through the morning air. "She's got her garden and those chickens she loves so much." Lorraine, with her perfectly styled silver hair and designer sunglasses perched on her head, nodded dismissively. "Besides, it's just for 2 weeks. The old farm girl can handle herself." The old farm girl who had raised their son alone for 15 years after his father died of cancer. The woman who had sacrificed everything so he could go to college. The mother who had signed over half her farm as collateral for his first business loan. When they finally drove away, the only acknowledgement of my existence was a hastily scribbled note stuck to the refrigerator. "Water the garden beds. Feed the chickens. Use the card if you need anything." 3 cold lines. Not even a "love you" or "will call." Just chores and an afterthought about money. I walked slowly through what used to be my home. 6 months ago, when Jason convinced me that Brittany and Lorraine moving in would be good for everyone, I never imagined I'd become invisible in my own house. But piece by piece, they'd erased me. My rocking chair, the one William and I bought when I was pregnant with Sarah, had been banished to the shed because it ruined the aesthetic of Lorraine's modern farmhouse vision. The quilts I'd made over decades were boxed up in the attic. Even my bedroom had been repurposed into Lorraine's meditation space, forcing me to sleep on a thin mattress in the converted tool room with no windows. "It's just temporary, Mom," Jason had promised. But the look in his eyes told me everything I needed to know. In their redesigned life, I was an inconvenience, a relic to be tucked away until I was gone for good. I shuffled to the kitchen sink and washed my mug, staring out at the garden I'd tended for 47 years. The soil knew me better than my own son did now. At least the earth still welcomed my touch. When night fell, I sat cross-legged on the floor of my makeshift bedroom, pulling an old shoebox from beneath the bed frame. Inside were the only things they hadn't yet taken from me, memories and papers they didn't know existed. My fingers trembled as I lifted out a faded photograph of my daughter Sarah, the one they never mentioned, the one whose name became forbidden after the accident. Next to it lay an old credit card in my name and a yellowed contract with my son's signature at the bottom. But there was something wrong with that signature, something I'd been too blind or too trusting to notice until now. I held the paper closer to the dim lamp, squinting through my reading glasses. The signature at the bottom wasn't mine. Someone had forged my name on a document transferring partial ownership of the farm. The handwriting looked suspiciously like Lorraine's elegant script. I felt something crack inside me. Not like breaking, but like ice thawing after a long winter. A dangerous warmth spreading through my chest. For decades, I'd been the understanding mother. the accommodating mother-in-law, the silent, invisible grandmother who never complained when family history was rewritten to exclude inconvenient truths. I tucked the contract back into the box and pulled out the credit card, the one connected to accounts they thought I'd forgotten about, the one they'd been using to fund their coastal getaways and shopping sprees. My weathered hands closed around the plastic rectangle, and for the first time in years, I felt something other than resignation. Tomorrow, they would call when the card stopped working, and tomorrow, I would finally speak. Morning came with a vengeance. The Nebraska sun pierced through the single small window of my tool-room bedroom, casting a harsh rectangle of light across my face. I'd barely slept, the contract and credit card tucked safely beneath my pillow like forbidden treasures. My joints ached as I pushed myself up from the thin mattress, each bone in my body protesting another day of invisibility. The chickens were already clucking impatiently by the time I made my way outside, the dew-soaked grass dampening my worn slippers. I scattered feed across the yard, watching them peck and scratch with a simple purpose I sometimes envied. At least they knew exactly who they were and what they wanted. No pretenses, no betrayals. At least you girls still need me, I whispered, my voice rough from disuse. It had been days since I'd spoken aloud to anyone. When you become furniture in your own home, conversation becomes a luxury. The chicken coop needed cleaning, a task Brittany had deemed absolutely disgusting, despite her Instagram posts about embracing farm life. I grabbed the shovel and rake, preparing for the messy work ahead. There was something honest about cleaning up waste, something real that Lorraine's designer farmhouse aesthetic couldn't replicate with all her expensive distressed wood signs that read "Gather" and "Farmhouse." My hands, once soft and youthful, now looked like topographical maps of a hard life, each callous and vein telling stories of fields plowed, children raised, and grief endured. As I scraped chicken droppings from the wooden slats, sweat began trickling down my temples despite the morning chill. October in Nebraska was unpredictable that way, cold nights giving way to surprisingly warm days. That's when I heard it. The shrill ring of my old flip phone, the one Jason insisted I keep in case of emergency, though he rarely called it himself. I wiped my forehead with my forearm, leaving behind a streak of dirt I couldn't see but could feel caking on my skin. I let it ring 4 times before answering, a small rebellion. "Hello?" I said, trying to sound as if I hadn't been waiting for this moment since they drove away yesterday. "Mom." Jason's voice came through, tense and slightly higher pitched than normal. I recognized that tone. It was the same one he used when he crashed William's truck at 16 and tried to hide his panic. "Yes?" I kept my response short, forcing him to continue. "The cards aren't working, any of them." He paused, waiting for my concern or confusion. I offered neither. "The hotel is asking for another payment method." "What happened?" I leaned against the chicken coop, suddenly aware of how my heart was pounding. 67 years I'd been on this earth, most of them spent putting others first, always smoothing things over, making peace, staying quiet when silence hurt less than fighting. "I didn't pay it," I said, my voice steadier than it had been in years, "and I'm not going to." The silence that followed was so complete, I could hear the gentle scratching of chickens in the dirt behind me. I imagined his face, the furrowed brow, the flash of anger, the disbelief that his reliable, compliant mother would do something so inconvenient. "What do you mean? You didn't pay it?" The entitlement in his voice sliced through me like a blade. "Mom, we're stranded here. Lorraine already reserved tickets for a sunset cruise. Brittany's been looking forward to this for months." "I'm sure you'll figure something out," I replied, surprised by the unfamiliar feeling of standing my ground. "You're resourceful when you need to be. Is this about the bedroom? We told you it's temporary. As soon as we—" "No," I cut him off. "This isn't about the bedroom." Another silence, this one heavier. "Then what is it about?" His voice had dropped now, cautious. He knew there was something else, something bigger. "We'll talk when you get back," I said. "Mom, that's not—" "Goodbye, Jason." And I closed the phone with a definitive snap. My hands were trembling, but not from fear. Something had awakened in me, something that had been dormant for decades. I walked back to the house, straight to my makeshift room, and pulled out the contract again. The forged signature stared back at me like an open accusation. It wasn't just about the money, though they'd taken plenty. It wasn't even about the room or the rocking chair or being relegated to the role of live-in servant. It was about what they tried to erase: my voice, my history, my daughter's memory. Everything that made me who I was. I sat on the edge of my bed and opened my old leather address book. There, in faded ink, was a number I hadn't called in 15 years. Harold Palmer, William's best friend and our family attorney, before Jason convinced me we didn't need his services anymore. My finger hovered over the digits. Once I made this call, there would be no going back. The careful facade of family harmony would shatter, but perhaps it had never existed in the first place. I dialed the number, not knowing if it was still in service after all these years. To my surprise, a familiar voice answered on the third ring. "Harold Palmer speaking." I took a deep breath. "Harold, it's Eileen. Eileen Callahan. I think I need your help." Harold promised to visit the next day, but sleep evaded me that night. My mind kept replaying the moment Brittany first walked into our lives, teetering on designer heels that sank into the soft earth of our driveway. She looked so out of place against the weathered barn and golden cornfields, like a glossy magazine page stuck between the pages of a well-worn family Bible. I remember how Jason's eyes followed her every movement, how he straightened his posture and used vocabulary I'd never heard from him before. It was as if my son, who once helped deliver calves and fixed tractor engines with his father, was auditioning for a role in someone else's story. But it wasn't just Brittany. 2 weeks after their first date, she brought her mother to Sunday dinner, Lorraine Westfield. Even her name sounded expensive. She arrived in a sleek black SUV, her silver blonde hair cut in a sharp, angled bob that looked as if it cost more than our monthly grocery budget. While Brittany at least attempted to compliment my home-cooked meal, Lorraine merely pushed the food around her plate, asking pointed questions about the farm's acreage and whether we'd considered maximizing its investment potential. Such a charming, rustic property, she'd said, her eyes cataloging every chipped plate and worn piece of furniture. It has so much potential. I didn't understand then what she meant by potential. I didn't realize I was being assessed, not as a potential mother-in-law, but as an obstacle to be managed and eventually removed. 3 months into Jason and Brittany's relationship, I discovered Lorraine was a regional vice president at First Heartland Bank, the same bank that held our farm loan. 6 months later, they were engaged, and Lorraine was making frequent phone calls on our porch, speaking in hushed tones about restructuring and family assets. A soft knock on my bedroom door jolted me back to the present. "Mrs. Callahan, it's Harold." I quickly smoothed my hair and straightened my cardigan before opening the door. Harold Palmer stood there looking older than I remembered, but with the same kind eyes behind thicker glasses. He carried a worn leather briefcase that I recognized from decades earlier when he'd helped William draft our will. "Eileen," he said warmly, taking my hand between both of his. "It's been too long." We settled at the kitchen table, the old oak one I'd refused to let them replace with some farmhouse chic monstrosity from a catalog. I made coffee in the percolator rather than using Brittany's complicated espresso machine that beeped and hissed like some angry robot. "Tell me everything," Harold said, pulling out a legal pad. "Start from the beginning." So I did. I told him about Jason and Brittany's whirlwind romance, about Lorraine's increasing presence in our lives, about being slowly pushed from the center of my home to its margins. But when I showed him the forged contract, his expression darkened. "This is serious, Eileen. This isn't just family squabbles. This is fraud." "There's more," I said quietly, retrieving my old bank statements from my shoebox of important papers. "Last week, I found these in Lorraine's guest room. She'd been going through my financial records." Harold examined the papers, his brow furrowing deeper with each page. "Do you remember authorizing these transfers?" he asked. pointing to a series of withdrawals dating back nearly 2 years. I shook my head. I thought Jason was handling the farm accounts like he offered to after William died. He said it would be easier with his business background. Harold removed his glasses and pinched the bridge of his nose. Eileen, they've been systematically draining your accounts. Small amounts at first, but increasingly larger sums. The farm is mortgaged to the hilt, with the loans secured against assets you supposedly signed over, but with forged signatures. My hands trembled as I reached for my coffee cup. But why would Jason do this? He's my son. Harold's eyes softened with a sadness that made my stomach clench. Is he aware of what's happening? Or is he being manipulated too? The question hit me like a physical blow. I'd been so hurt by Jason's behavior that I hadn't considered he might be another victim in this scheme. Lorraine was a banker after all. She knew how to move money, how to structure deals, how to make everything appear legitimate. I don't know, I whispered, the realization bringing both pain and a strange hope. But there's something else troubling me, Harold. Something about Sarah. At the mention of my daughter's name, the kitchen seemed to grow colder. Sarah, my firstborn, my beautiful girl, who had supposedly died in a car accident on County Road 27 16 years ago. The daughter whose body was never recovered because of the fire. The child whose memory Jason and his new family never acknowledged. What about Sarah? Harold asked carefully. I took a deep breath. I was never allowed to see her body. There was no autopsy report. And recently, I've noticed a little girl who visits the neighboring property. She has Sarah's eyes, Harold, and she draws the same way Sarah used to, trees with faces hidden in the bark. Harold set down his pen. Eileen, what exactly are you suggesting? I don't know, I admitted. But yesterday, when I called the county records office pretending to be Lorraine, I paused, embarrassed by my deception. Go on, Harold encouraged. There's no death certificate for Sarah Callahan. Not in this county, not in this state. Harold's face paled. He opened his briefcase and pulled out a file I hadn't seen in years. I kept copies of everything, Eileen. Even after Jason said you didn't need my services anymore. Together we began to piece together a puzzle whose picture was more horrifying than I could have imagined. A puzzle that suggested my daughter might not be dead at all, and that the empire Lorraine and Brittany had built might be standing on a foundation of my family's destruction. After Harold left, promising to start investigating immediately, the farmhouse felt even emptier than before. The walls seemed to lean in, whispering secrets I wasn't ready to hear. Outside, the October wind picked up, rattling the windows like impatient fingers demanding entry. Night was falling earlier now, the autumn darkness swallowing the cornfields beyond my property line. I stood at the kitchen sink, my reflection ghostly in the window glass. Behind me, Lorraine's expensive coffee machine sat like an alien spacecraft that had landed in my homey kitchen. The digital clock on the microwave blinked 8:17 p.m. Jason hadn't called back after I'd hung up on him. Perhaps they'd found another way to pay for their coastal adventure. Perhaps they were too angry to speak to me at all. My chest tightened at the thought of confrontation, but something stronger pushed back against the fear. Determination. I dried my hands on a dish towel and made a decision. If I was going to reclaim my life, I needed to start with reclaiming my daughter's memory. I grabbed a flashlight from the drawer and stepped out onto the back porch. The night air smelled of approaching rain and harvested corn, a scent that had marked every autumn of my life. My boots crunched on the gravel path leading to the barn, the beam of light bobbing ahead of me like a lonely firefly. The barn door creaked as I pushed it open, the sound eerily similar to Sarah's old bedroom door upstairs, the one that now belonged to Brittany's extensive wardrobe. I swept the flashlight across the dusty interior, illuminating farm equipment, stacked hay bales, and the shadowy corner where William used to repair machinery. At the back, partially hidden behind an old tractor tarp, stood a weathered chest. Jason had wanted to throw it out during one of Lorraine's decluttering campaigns, but I'd insisted on keeping it. Just old baby clothes, I'd told them. Sentimental junk, Brittany had muttered when she thought I couldn't hear. My knees protested as I knelt beside the chest. The flashlight clenched between my teeth as I worked the rusty latch. Inside, carefully wrapped in acid-free tissue paper, lay the artifacts of a life that had been systematically erased from our family narrative. Sarah's baby blanket, crocheted by my mother before she passed, a collection of report cards showing straight A's, the softball trophy from 7th grade when she pitched a no-hitter in the county championship, a stack of drawings, each one signed with her distinctive flourish, the final H in Sarah always extending into a tiny shooting star. I lifted out a pale yellow sundress, the one she wore on her 16th birthday. It still smelled faintly of the lavender sachet she kept in her dresser drawer. Below it was a small velvet box containing the pearl earrings William had given her for that birthday, the last gift he gave her before cancer took him 2 months later. And there, at the very bottom, wrapped in an old pillowcase, was her childhood teddy bear, one-eyed and balding in spots, but still wearing the tiny red bandana she had tied around its neck. Something hard pressed against my fingers through the worn fabric of the bear's belly. Curious, I felt along the seam and discovered a small tear in the stuffing. I carefully reached inside and pulled out a folded piece of paper. My hands trembled as I unfolded what appeared to be a letter written in Sarah's handwriting. The date at the top made my breath catch. July 8th, 3 days before her accident. The paper was water-stained in places, making some words difficult to read, but the first line was crystal clear. "Mom, if you're reading this, something has happened and I couldn't tell you directly." A sob escaped my throat, echoing in the empty barn. I forced myself to continue reading by the wavering beam of the flashlight. "I'm pregnant. 4 months along now. The father is Tyler Westfield." My mind reeled. Westfield? Like Lorraine Westfield? I read on, my heart pounding painfully against my ribs. His mother found out and went crazy. Said her son wasn't going to throw away his future on farm trash like me. She's powerful, Mom. She's threatened to destroy the farm, to ruin us. Tyler's too scared to stand up to her. The letter continued, describing how Sarah planned to leave town to protect the baby and our family from Lorraine's threats. She promised to contact me when it was safe, but she never did. Because 3 days later, Sarah's car allegedly went off County Road 27, burst into flames, and took my daughter's life. Except there was no death certificate, no body, and now a child next door with Sarah's eyes and artistic talent. I carefully refolded the letter and tucked it into my pocket. As I did, something else caught my attention. A small photograph stuck to the bottom of the chest. I peeled it off and held it to the light. It showed Sarah standing beside a young man with sandy blonde hair and a hesitant smile. His arm was around her waist, his hand resting protectively over her stomach. On the back, written in Sarah's hand, "Me and Tyler, May 20th. Tyler Westfield. Lorraine's son. The man who would have been the father of Sarah's child. The same man who, according to an offhand comment Brittany once made, had died in a tragic accident shortly before she and Jason met. 2 accidents, 2 missing bodies, one formidable woman connecting it all. I gathered the photograph, the letter, and the teddy bear, hugging them to my chest as if they could somehow bring my daughter back to me. Rain had started to fall outside, pattering against the barn roof like impatient fingers. But I barely noticed as I made my way back to the house, my mind racing with questions that had lain dormant for 16 years. Tomorrow, I would find a way to speak to the little girl next door, the child who might be the granddaughter I never knew I had. Morning arrived with the gentle persistence of a memory that refuses to fade. I hadn't slept more than a few fitful hours. Sarah's letter tucked beneath my pillow like a talisman. The house creaked and settled around me as I made my way to the kitchen, my joints stiff from tension as much as age. The phone rang just as I was pouring my first cup of coffee. Harold's voice came through the line, tense with urgency. "Eileen, I've been making calls. There's something you need to know about Lorraine Westfield." I sat down at the kitchen table, clutching the mug for warmth. "Tell me." 16 years ago, she wasn't just a regional VP at First Heartland. She was on the board of directors for Midwest Agricultural Holdings. The name struck a chord. William's old employer, the corporation that tried to buy our farm. The very same, Harold confirmed. They wanted your land for a development project. Luxury homes with authentic farm views. When William refused to sell, they tried other tactics. My mind raced back to those difficult months before William's diagnosis. The mysterious cattle illness that decimated half our herd. The equipment failures that seemed too frequent to be coincidence. The sudden denial of the operating loan we'd qualified for every year prior. Are you saying Lorraine was behind all that? Harold's sigh crackled through the connection. I can't prove it, not yet. But her name appears on documents authorizing aggressive acquisition strategies for properties in your county. I thought of Sarah's letter, of Lorraine's reaction to her son's relationship with my daughter. Harold, there's something else you should know. After I told him about the letter and the photograph, the line went silent for a long moment. Eileen, he finally said, his voice grave, you need to be careful. If what we suspect is true, these people won't hesitate to protect themselves. After hanging up, I moved to the window overlooking the neighboring property, a small cottage with a well-tended garden where an elderly woman lived with her granddaughter. The little girl, Lily, was already outside, kneeling in a patch of soil near the fence line that separated our properties. I grabbed a basket and filled it with fresh eggs from this morning's collection, a peace offering, an excuse. The grass was still damp with dew as I made my way across the yard, my heart pounding with each step. What would I say? How could I ask the questions burning in my throat without seeming like a desperate old woman clinging to impossible hopes? As I approached the fence, Lily looked up. She couldn't have been more than 15, with honey brown hair pulled back in a messy ponytail and dirt smudged across her freckled cheeks. But it was her eyes that made my breath catch. Hazel with flecks of gold, just like Sarah's, just like William's. Good morning, I called, trying to keep my voice steady. I brought some fresh eggs for you and your grandmother. Lily smiled, rising to her feet and wiping her hands on worn jeans. That's really nice of you, Mrs. Callahan. Grandma Ruth just said we needed eggs for pancakes tomorrow. I passed the basket over the fence, studying her face with hungry eyes, the curve of her cheekbones, the small dimple in her left cheek when she smiled. They were Sarah's features mapped onto a younger face. What are you planting? I asked, nodding towards the freshly turned soil. Daffodil bulbs, she replied, pride evident in her voice. They were my mom's favorite. Grandma Ruth says if we plant them now, they'll bloom for my mom's birthday in April. April. Sarah's birthday was April 12th. Your mother must be very special, I ventured carefully. A shadow passed over Lily's sunny expression. She passed away when I was just a baby. I never got to meet her. She gestured toward the cottage. Grandma Ruth was her foster mother. She took me in after it happened. Foster mother, not biological grandmother. My pulse quickened. I'm so sorry, I said sincerely, even as hope bloomed painfully in my chest. Do you know much about her? Lily bent down to continue her planting. Not really. Grandma doesn't like talking about it. Says it makes her too sad. She pressed a bulb into the earth with gentle fingers. I know her name was Emma, and that she loved to draw. Emma, not Sarah. I felt a flicker of disappointment, but something didn't add up. The timing, the artistic talent, those unmistakable eyes. Those are beautiful, I said, pointing to a row of stones bordering the garden. Each one was painted with intricate designs. Trees with faces hidden in the bark. Flowers with galaxies swirling in their centers. Sarah's distinctive style. Thanks, I painted them, Lily beamed. Grandma says I get it from my mom. She was an artist too. The back door of the cottage opened, and an elderly woman appeared on the porch. She waved briefly in my direction before calling out, Lily, time for your online classes, dear. Coming, Grandma. Lily gathered her gardening tools. Thanks for the eggs, Mrs. Callahan. Lily, I said quickly before she could leave, would you like to see some drawings sometime? I used to know a young artist who drew trees very similar to yours. Her eyes lit up with interest. Really? That would be amazing. She glanced toward the cottage where Ruth was waiting. Maybe tomorrow? I'm usually out here around this time. I nodded, trying to contain the emotion threatening to overwhelm me. Tomorrow, then. As I walked back to my empty house, my mind was anything but empty. Ruth, the name tugged at my memory. Ruth Hensley, Sarah's high school art teacher, the woman who had mentored my daughter, who had seen her talent and encouraged her to apply for art school. The woman who had attended Sarah's memorial service alone, standing at the back with red-rimmed eyes, refusing to speak to anyone. I closed the kitchen door behind me and leaned against it, sliding slowly to the floor as tears finally broke free. 16 years of grief, of acceptance, of moving forward, all shattered by the possibility that my daughter's child had been living just beyond our fence line all this time. And if Lily was indeed Sarah's daughter, what did that mean about Sarah herself? About the accident that supposedly took her life? About Tyler Westfield's convenient death? The questions burned through me like wildfire, consuming the woman I had been, the compliant mother-in-law, the silent farm wife, pushed to the margins of her own life. From the ashes, something new was emerging, something with teeth and claws, and a fierce determination to uncover the truth, no matter who got burned in the process. By late afternoon, the house phone had rung 17 times. I'd let each call go to the answering machine, listening as Jason's voice grew increasingly desperate. "Mom, please pick up. We're stranded here. The hotel is threatening to call security. Mom, this isn't funny anymore." I sat at the kitchen table, Sarah's letter spread before me alongside the bank statements I'd gathered from my shoebox of important papers. The more I examined them, the more disturbing patterns emerged. Small withdrawals at first, amounts I might not notice if I wasn't paying close attention. Then larger transfers, always on days when Jason had insisted on driving me to my doctor's appointments, leaving Brittany and Lorraine alone in the house. My hands trembled as I dialed First Heartland Bank. After navigating an automated system that seemed designed to discourage human contact, I finally reached a customer service representative. "I'd like to speak with someone about unusual activity on my accounts," I said, trying to sound confident rather than like a confused old woman. "Certainly, ma'am. I'll need to verify your identity first." I provided my social security number, date of birth, and answered security questions about my mother's maiden name and the street where I grew up. Simple things that belong to me alone. "Thank you, Mrs. Callahan. I'm showing that your account has a financial power of attorney on file. Would you like me to transfer you to Mr. Jason Callahan instead? He handles most of your banking matters." My stomach clenched. "No, I want to speak with a manager now, please. Mrs. Callahan, I see a note here that you have early-stage dementia and that your son—" "I do not have dementia," I interrupted, my voice sharper than I intended. "That diagnosis is fabricated. I want to speak with a manager immediately, or I'll be contacting the banking commission about elder financial abuse." The silence on the other end lasted several seconds before the representative responded. "One moment, please." 20 minutes and 3 transfers later, I was speaking with Dale Hoffman, a vice president at the local branch. His tone was carefully neutral, but I could hear the wariness beneath his professional veneer. "Mrs. Callahan, I understand you have concerns about your accounts. How can I help? I need to see all documentation related to the power of attorney supposedly granted to my son, as well as complete statements for all my accounts for the past 5 years. That's quite a lot of documentation, ma'am. It might be easier if you came into the branch with your son to—" "Mr. Hoffman," I cut in, summoning the voice I once used to reprimand unruly students during my brief teaching career before marrying William. "I believe my accounts have been compromised through fraudulent means. I'll be at your branch tomorrow at 10 a.m., and I expect those documents to be ready. I'll be bringing my attorney, Harold Palmer." The mention of Harold's name changed something in Dale's tone. "Harold Palmer is representing you?" "Yes. Is that a problem?" "No, ma'am. No problem at all. We'll have everything ready for your appointment tomorrow." After hanging up, I sat in the growing shadows of late afternoon, watching dust motes dance in the slanting sunlight. The house felt different somehow, less like a prison and more like a battlefield. Each room held memories of the family we had been, but also evidence of how thoroughly Lorraine and Brittany had worked to erase that history. The clock on the mantel, William's grandfather's clock that had survived 2 world wars, chimed 4 times, reminding me that I needed to act quickly. If Jason and his new family returned before I had gathered enough evidence, I might lose this fleeting window of opportunity. I grabbed my purse and the keys to the old pickup truck they'd banished to the back of the barn, deemed too embarrassing for their carefully curated image. The engine protested when I turned the key, coughing and sputtering before reluctantly rumbling to life. Like me, it had been set aside, but not quite defeated. The drive into town took longer than I remembered, or perhaps I was simply driving more cautiously than usual, aware of how much now depended on my actions. First Heartland Bank's imposing brick facade loomed at the end of Main Street, its windows reflecting the late afternoon sun like suspicious eyes. Inside, the marble floors gleamed under fluorescent lights, and the air smelled of lemon polish and money. A young woman at the reception desk looked up as I approached, her practiced smile faltering slightly as she took in my appearance. Faded jeans, worn flannel shirt, and determination etched into every line of my face. "May I help you?" she asked, her gaze flickering to the security guard stationed near the entrance. "I'm Eileen Callahan. I have an account here." I placed my driver's license on the counter. "I need to speak with someone about accessing my safe deposit box." Her perfectly manicured fingers picked up my ID, examining it closely. "Of course, Mrs. Callahan. Let me check your account information." She tapped at her computer, her expression shifting subtly. "I see you have a joint box with your son, Jason Callahan. Would you like me to call him to meet you here?" "No," I said firmly. "The box was originally in my name only. I need to access it alone." More typing, a slight frown. "I'm showing that the access permissions were changed last year. Both parties must be present too." "That change was made without my knowledge or consent," I interrupted, leaning closer and lowering my voice. "I believe documents in that box may have been altered or removed fraudulently. Unless you want to be part of a banking fraud investigation, I suggest you check who authorized that change and on what basis." Her eyes widened slightly. "One moment, please." She disappeared into a back office, returning several minutes later with an older man in a tailored suit. He introduced himself as Richard Townsend, the branch manager, and invited me into his private office, a wood-paneled room with certificates on the walls and family photos arranged precisely on his desk. "Mrs. Callahan, Amber tells me you have concerns about your safe deposit box." I met his gaze directly. "Mr. Townsend, 16 years ago, my husband and I placed our original property deeds, my daughter's birth certificate, and other important family documents in that box. I now have reason to believe someone has accessed it without proper authorization and potentially removed or altered those documents." He steepled his fingers, studying me carefully. "That's a serious allegation." "Yes, it is, and I intend to pursue it fully, with legal representation if necessary." Something in my unwavering tone must have convinced him. He nodded once, then picked up his phone. "Amber, please pull the access logs for box 247 and prepare the secure room. I'll be escorting Mrs. Callahan personally." 20 minutes later, I sat alone in a small viewing room, a metal box open before me. My hands trembled as I sorted through the contents. Insurance policies, William's will, tax documents from years past. But the property deeds were missing. So was Sarah's birth certificate. In their place was a single sheet of paper, a transfer of ownership agreement with my signature at the bottom, a signature I had never made. The summons arrived 3 days later by certified mail. I signed for it with trembling hands, the delivery man oblivious to how the official-looking envelope was changing the course of my life. The return address bore the seal of the county court, and inside was a notice for a preliminary hearing regarding suspected financial fraud, with my name listed as the plaintiff. Harold had moved quickly. I sat at the kitchen table, reading and rereading the document. The hearing was scheduled for next Monday, 4 days from now, 4 days before Jason, Brittany, and Lorraine were due to return from their coastal vacation. 4 days to prepare for the most difficult confrontation of my life. My cell phone rang, the special ringtone I'd assigned to Harold's calls. "It's all happening faster than I expected," he said after I answered. "Judge Martinson has a personal interest in elder abuse cases. Her own mother was victimized by a caregiver who drained her accounts. "Does Jason know yet?" I asked, my voice catching on my son's name. "The court will serve him electronically since he's out of state. He'll receive notification within 24 hours. I closed my eyes, imagining Jason's reaction. Would he be angry? Frightened? Would he finally see how his wife and mother-in-law had manipulated him? Or would he continue defending them? "There's something else, Eileen," Harold continued, his tone growing more serious. "I've been doing some digging into Tyler Westfield's death. The official report says he died in a boating accident on Lake McConaughey. Body never recovered. But I spoke with a former sheriff's deputy who worked the case. He said there were inconsistencies that were never properly investigated." My hand tightened around the phone. "What kind of inconsistencies?" "Tyler's boat was found with minimal damage. Certainly not the kind you'd expect in an accident violent enough to throw someone overboard. And there were unusual transfer patterns in his bank accounts in the weeks before his disappearance. Large sums moving through shell companies connected to—" "Let me guess," I interrupted. "Connected to Lorraine Westfield and Midwest Agricultural Holdings," Harold confirmed. "The deputy was building a case for possible foul play when he was suddenly reassigned. The investigation was closed as an accidental drowning." A chill ran through me despite the warmth of the kitchen. "Harold, what kind of people are we dealing with?" His response was measured but grave. "The kind with enough money and influence to make problems disappear. But they've never faced someone like you before, Eileen." The next few days passed in a blur of preparation. Harold arranged for a forensic accountant to review all my financial records. I spent hours on the phone with bank officials, insurance representatives, and county records clerks. Each conversation revealed new layers of deception. Accounts opened in my name that I'd never authorized. Insurance policies altered. Property boundaries mysteriously redrawn. I tried repeatedly to visit Lily next door, but Ruth kept her close, watching with suspicious eyes whenever I approached their fence line. Had she somehow been warned? Did she know what was coming? The morning of the hearing arrived with an unseasonable frost. I stood before my bathroom mirror, hardly recognizing the woman who stared back. I'd abandoned my usual worn jeans and flannel for a simple navy dress I'd kept in the back of my closet, the one I'd worn to William's funeral. I'd applied a touch of lipstick and pinned my silver hair back with the pearl clips Sarah had given me for Mother's Day the year before she disappeared. "You can do this," I whispered to my reflection. "For William, for Sarah, for yourself." Harold picked me up in his sensible sedan, his briefcase bulging with documents. "Ready?" he asked as I buckled my seatbelt. "As I'll ever be," I replied, clutching my purse where I'd tucked Sarah's letter and the photograph of her with Tyler. The courthouse stood in the center of town, its limestone facade weathered by decades of prairie winds. Inside, the polished floors echoed with our footsteps as Harold guided me to courtroom B. My heart pounded so loudly I was certain everyone could hear it. We were early, but the courtroom wasn't empty. A slender man in a tailored suit sat at one of the tables, surrounded by folders and a sleek laptop. When he looked up, I recognized Martin Green, the accountant who had handled Jason's business taxes for years. "Mrs. Callahan," he said, rising to his feet. His expression was unreadable. "I didn't expect to see you here." "Hello, Martin," I replied, unsure whether he was friend or foe in this unfolding drama. Harold stepped slightly forward, positioning himself between us. "Mr. Green, I wasn't aware you'd be joining us today." Martin's gaze shifted between us. "I received some concerning documentation regarding Callahan Enterprises. Discrepancies that couldn't be explained by normal accounting practices." He hesitated, then added quietly, "I've already submitted my resignation as their accountant." Before I could respond, the courtroom doors opened again. My breath caught as Jason stormed in, his face flushed with anger. Behind him came Brittany, her designer sunglasses perched on her head despite the indoor setting, and Lorraine, impeccably dressed in a cream-colored suit that probably cost more than a month's worth of farm expenses. "Mom, what the hell is this?" Jason demanded, waving a tablet displaying the court summons. "We had to cut our vacation short for whatever this insanity is." I straightened my spine, meeting my son's gaze directly. "It's not insanity, Jason. It's the truth finally coming to light. Lorraine stepped forward, her smile cold and professional. Eileen, dear, there's clearly been a misunderstanding. You haven't been yourself lately. These accusations are simply a product of confusion. I'm not confused, Lorraine, I replied, my voice steadier than I expected. I know exactly what you've done. To me, to my farm, to my family. Mom, Jason interjected, his voice lowered to an urgent whisper. Stop this now. You're embarrassing yourself. We can still fix this if you drop these ridiculous claims. Harold placed a supportive hand on my shoulder. The only thing that needs fixing, Mr. Callahan, is the systematic fraud perpetrated against your mother. Brittany's perfectly manicured hand clutched Jason's arm. Jason, don't engage. Our lawyers will handle this. She cast a dismissive glance in my direction. It's sad, really. Dementia can make people so paranoid. The word hung in the air between us. Dementia. The convenient diagnosis they'd fabricated to justify taking control of my finances, my property, my life. Before I could respond, the bailiff called the court to order, and Judge Martinson entered, a stern-faced woman with silver hair and piercing blue eyes. As we all took our seats, I felt Lorraine's gaze burning into me, calculating and cold. The battle lines were drawn, and for the first time in years, I wasn't backing down. The courthouse steps felt different beneath my feet as I descended them after the hearing, almost as if the ground itself had shifted. Perhaps it had. 3 hours inside that wood-paneled courtroom had changed everything. Harold walked beside me, his weathered face creased with a smile that spoke of justice, long delayed, but finally served. The autumn sun broke through scattered clouds, warming my face as we reached the sidewalk. You did it, Eileen, he said quietly, squeezing my arm. You stood your ground. Behind us, the courthouse doors burst open. Jason stormed out, his tie loosened and face flushed with a mixture of anger and something I hadn't seen there in years. Shame. Brittany trailed behind him, frantically texting on her phone, designer sunglasses now firmly in place to hide her eyes. But it was Lorraine who captured my attention. Her cream-colored suit no longer appeared pristine, but somehow diminished, like her carefully constructed facade. This isn't over, she hissed as she passed, her voice low enough that only I could hear. You have no idea what you've done. I watched them climb into their luxury SUV, the same one they'd used to drive away from me days ago. But now they weren't leaving me behind. They were the ones being left. Come on, Harold said gently. I'll drive you home. Home. The word held new meaning now. Judge Martinson's ruling had been unequivocal. An immediate freezing of all disputed assets, a formal investigation into the forged documents, and most importantly, a temporary restraining order preventing Jason, Brittany, and Lorraine from entering the farm property until ownership could be properly established. The drive back to the farm passed in comfortable silence. I watched the familiar landscape roll by. Golden cornfields ready for harvest. The water tower that had stood sentinel over our town for generations. The weathered red barn at the Miller place that leaned slightly to the left. What will you do now? Harold asked as we turned onto the gravel road leading to my farm. I considered his question, watching dust billow behind us in the rearview mirror. Plant something new, I said finally. Something that's just mine. As Harold's car disappeared down the driveway, I stood alone in the yard, truly alone for the first time in years. No one watching, judging, correcting. The freedom felt both terrifying and exhilarating. I walked slowly around the property, reacquainting myself with corners that had been deemed unimportant in Lorraine's grand redesign. The old apple tree William had planted when Jason was born still stood near the western fence line, gnarled but stubbornly productive. The stone path I'd laid with Sarah one summer wound through what used to be my herb garden before Brittany decided it was too country and replaced it with decorative grasses. Near the back porch, I found the perfect spot, a small patch of earth catching the late afternoon sun. I retrieved a trowel from the shed and knelt in the soil, ignoring the protest from my knees. The earth felt cool between my fingers as I dug a shallow hole. From my pocket, I pulled a small envelope containing seeds I'd saved from Sarah's favorite sunflowers. the ones that had once lined our driveway before they were deemed too common and removed. These descendants of those original plants had been secretly growing in a corner of the chicken yard where no one bothered to look. As I covered the seeds with soil, movement caught my eye. Lily stood at the fence line between our properties, watching me with curious eyes. Beside her was Ruth, her expression guarded but no longer hostile. I rose slowly, brushing dirt from my dress, the same one I'd worn to court. "Hello," I called, raising a hand in greeting. Ruth hesitated, then nodded slightly. "We heard what happened in town. News travels fast." "Yes, it does," I agreed, approaching the fence that separated us. Lily looked between us, confusion evident in her young face, Sarah's face in so many ways. "Grandma Ruth says you knew my mother," she said directly, with a forthrightness that reminded me painfully of Sarah at that age. I glanced at Ruth, who gave an almost imperceptible nod. Permission granted. "Yes," I said, my voice thick with emotion. "I knew her very well." "Were you friends?" Lily asked, stepping closer to the fence. The question hung in the air between us, laden with 16 years of secrets and silence. I looked at Ruth, whose eyes had filled with tears. "It's time," she said softly. "She deserves to know." I opened the gate between our properties, a barrier I'd never crossed before. Ruth guided us to her small porch where 3 rocking chairs waited, as if she'd been expecting this moment. As we settled into them, the wooden slats creaking beneath our weight, I reached into my purse and withdrew the photograph of Sarah and Tyler. "Lily," I said, my voice steadier than I expected. "I wasn't your mother's friend." I handed her the photograph. "I was her mother. I'm your grandmother." Her fingers trembled as she took the photo, her eyes widening as she recognized her mother's face, younger than she'd ever seen in the few pictures Ruth had shared, and glowing with life and love. "But I don't understand," she whispered, looking between Ruth and me. "Grandma Ruth said my mother died in an accident and my father's family wanted nothing to do with me." Ruth reached over to take Lily's hand. "That's partly true, child. Your mother didn't die in the accident everyone believed happened. She was hiding from Lorraine Westfield, from the threats against her and this farm, from everything. Emma wasn't her real name," I added gently. "She was Sarah, my Sarah." The pieces fell into place in Lily's expressive eyes, so like her mother's, so like mine. "Then, where is she now?" "My real mother?" Ruth and I exchanged a glance, laden with shared grief. "We don't know," Ruth admitted. "She left you with me when you were just 2 months old. Said she had evidence against Lorraine that would protect you both, but she needed to deliver it somewhere safe. She never returned." The weight of this truth settled over us as the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the porch. Lily sat silently, absorbing the revelation of her true heritage, studying the photograph of parents she'd never known. "The farm," she said suddenly, looking up at me. "That's why they wanted it so badly, isn't it? Not just for the land, but to erase any trace of my mother, of me." In that moment I saw not just Sarah in her features, but William's shrewd intelligence, his ability to see through to the heart of things. "Yes," I confirmed, "but they failed. The truth always finds its way to the surface, like seeds pushing through soil toward the light." As darkness fell, we continued rocking gently on that porch, 3 generations of women connected by blood and loss and newfound hope. For the first time in 16 years, I felt the pieces of my fractured life beginning to realign, not into what had been before, that was gone forever, but into something new, something true, something that, like the sunflower seeds I'd planted, might yet grow toward the light. Sometimes the most courageous thing we can do is simply say, no. No to being erased, no to being silenced, no to watching our own lives become stories written by someone else. It took me 67 years to find that courage, to stand in my truth even when the people I loved most tried to convince me I was confused, broken, or no longer relevant. What would you do if you discovered your entire life had been built on carefully constructed lies? Would you have the strength to tear it all down and start again? To face the painful truth that the people closest to you were capable of unimaginable betrayal? Sometimes the family we build from broken pieces is stronger than the one we were born into. A lesson I learned standing on Ruth's porch with my granddaughter, 3 generations reconnecting under an autumn sky. If my story touched your heart, please follow my channel for more stories of resilience and redemption. Like and share with someone who needs to be reminded of their own strength today. Remember that it's never too late to reclaim your voice, your history, and your future. Even when they've taken everything else, they can never take your truth unless you let them.